All right, so while we are waiting for just a few more people to show up here, I might have our team introduce themselves just so you guys know who we have on our panel with us today. Garrett, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Good morning, guys. My name is Garrett Gibb. I am a rescue captain with the Hawaii Fire Department. I've been with the IAFF F2T program since 2003 as a member, and then 2012 as an instructor. I'm glad you guys are on here. It's been educational for me as an instructor, so hopefully you're getting the same benefits. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Garrett. Dave.
Hey everybody, my name is Dave Samizian. I'm a pump operator with Dearborn Heights Fire Department, local 1355 out of Michigan. I've been with them 17 years and I've been with the F2T team for just about 2 now. So I'm one of the newer instructors. Just like Garrett said, this virtual thing has been really educational for us as well. We've enjoyed it. We're always here to help. I know there's a list of emails if we can help anybody out, but thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Luke.
Hello, everybody. My name is Luke Peterson. I'm an acting captain in Waterloo, Ontario. I also serve as our chair of wellness and fitness, as well as our health and safety committee. I'm happy to be here. Happy to see some familiar names in attendance, and yeah, looking forward to being involved in today's session.
Thanks, Luke. And Grady.
Hi, everybody. I'm Grady Valensis. I'm a deputy director with Health and Safety Operational Services at the IAFF headquarters in Washington, D.C. I retired from the Prince George's County, Maryland Fire Department, and happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Grady. And Harrison.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name is Harrison Beeforth, based out of Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada. I'm not a firefighter by trade. My background is in strength conditioning and kinesiology here. I've been working, that's where I did my education, working with athletes at the university level for about 5 years. And since then, I've been working exclusively with firefighters on the Fit to Thrive team. Great to see everyone here. Just like Luke said, some familiar names I see. Just a couple of admin for anyone who hasn't been here to a webinar before. You won't be able to use your mics or video. It's just the panelists. If you do have any questions, right at the bottom of your Zoom program, there should be a Q&A button. If you click that, you can type in whatever questions you may have. If it's something that we can answer, we might type out a response. If it's something that's a bit more involved, that may wait till the end, and we'll be able to verbalize the answer to you. So other than that, hope glad to see you here and hope you enjoy the webinar.
Great, thanks, Harrison. And my name is Dave Frost. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto and have been involved with the IAFF with their Wellness Fitness Initiative, Peer Fitness Trainer Program, and Fit to Thrive since 2009. All the work that I do, both I guess academically or research-wise and practice-wise, is with the fire service, and it's been that way since about 2007. Absolutely love this. The topic today, in terms of injuries, this is in a way, this is where I started. So going back to 2007, in doing some of the research that I was doing with the fire service, we were really looking to see, how can we reduce injuries? And so it started with understanding the scope of the problem, really trying to dig into what are the sources of injuries in the fire service, and then looking at all the different opportunities that we have to either mitigate risk or prevent some of these injuries. So I think it's a really interesting topic. Hope you guys take a lot away from today. So with that said, before we do kick into the slides that we have for you guys, I thought I'd just ask a question of our panel, just so we can kind of paint some context. So anybody from our team, if you want to comment on the role that either injuries play in your life, or how you think about injuries, and whether or not your perspective of injuries or attitude towards injuries has changed over time, either because of something that happened or just because of age. If anybody has any comments on that.
Yeah, Dave, I'll go first.
Sure. Thanks, Garrett.
Okay. We were talking about this earlier before we came live, but my thoughts on injury and the role it's played in my life has drastically changed, over the course of my career and my life. When you're 20, and for those guys who are 20, God, I wish I were you, but you're bulletproof, right? Your brain doesn't process injury, and it doesn't take avoiding injury into any part of the context of your life or play. So injuries as a young man really didn't come to the forefront. So you think you're bulletproof, and you are for the most part. As you recover really well, and it's great. But as time catches up to you, those and you know what, I got injured a lot. Most of them were through motorcycle accidents, car accidents, things like that, but no training injuries. And as time evolved and recently, those injuries are coming on. But when I look back on why these, and for those of you that have taken a class, you'll understand why I'm getting these injuries now. These injuries aren't a result of what I'm doing now. What I'm doing now allows me to continue working. All these injuries were caused over 20, 30 years of my lifestyle. So
Yeah, I think it's an important point Garrett makes there. Just, a lot of the injuries firefighters sustain, but just, people sustain in general, aren't from a one-time event. It is, kind of the accumulation of a lot of things over time. And, how we approach things, at one stage of our life, perhaps not thinking about the consequences down the road. It can come back to just raise its head and say, hey, I'm still here. So, really being aware of how injuries can happen, and the potential implications or impact that it can have on your quality of life, not only today but down the road, I think is a big one. Anyone else? Yeah, Luke.
I think Garrett said some interesting points there, and I think for me it highlighted when I think of injury for myself, or even for the people that I work with, I think it automatically comes to sustainability. We work a long career, hopefully a long career. When I was younger, like Garrett mentioned, in my early days of firefighting, I think my intensity was really focused on that individual day. But now my focus is now on long-term sustainability. So I'm much smarter with how I program my exercise, program my rest and recovery, so that I can play the long game. So, it doesn't impress me as much what my 20-year-old self could do, but what impresses me are what the 40-year-old and 50-year-old can do. Those that can play the long game and sort of, prolong this performance throughout a whole career, I think, to me, is how I frame this whole injury thing nowadays anyways.
Thanks, Luke. That's great. Anyone else? Grady.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think when I was on the job, it mattered to me personally whether I stayed fit and healthy and was able to have a long-lasting career. But now that I've transitioned out to the IAFF and we're looking at things from a much larger perspective, I look at like reports on what the economic impact is. And when you look at the more recent USFA report back in 2019 on firefighter injuries, it breaks down to about almost $5,000 per United States firefighter in injury cost for a department. That can range from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars for your department, and it's in the billions across the United States alone. Think about how much more we could do to stand up preventive programs or wellness fitness programs, or just training programs to prevent the traumatic fireground injuries that we see. That, and just not have that human toll, that human suffering that our members endure every single day. The psychological impact that comes comes with that, and that can tear families apart. So I've learned a lot about that in the short time I've been at the IAFF, but that's how I'm looking at it. How do we lessen or reduce those types of events? Thank you.
Thanks, Grady. I think it's a great point that Grady raises, and maybe one thing I'll mention is that when we are looking at costs of injuries, and they're a real thing, just the economics that go into this, sometimes we can be a little short-sighted and just look at what the claim is in this annual cycle. So how much are we paying out for injury right now? But the reality is a lot of the injuries sustained by firefighters don't go away, and so a department will continue paying into that injury for a long time. And if someone retires on disability, that's going to be there for 20, 30 years. And so it's, really when we look at the claims and the cost of claims, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more that is being paid out underneath the surface. And so costs are a real thing. And just consider the, the bigger term impact, or the long-term impact of some of the injuries that are being sustained by firefighters.
Dave, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, of course, Garrett.
Yeah. So this is for the younger firefighters. So don't get turned off by listening to the old dinosaurs talk about how we're just trying to make it through the end of our career. My 20-year-old self, it was all about competing at the highest level. And if I had known better and worked better, and those injuries would have prevented me every single time from achieving the highest level. So every time you get injured, you step back and go. So avoiding injuries and working out the right way will allow you to reach a higher level. So focus on that rather than sustainability, but competing at the higher level and avoiding injuries will help you now and 40 years from now.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, I working with athletes for a large portion of my career as well. They got to still stay healthy to train. It's the same thing with firefighters. The younger firefighter, if you hurt yourself, you can't train, you can't be on the job, and so it is staying ready at the moment. One other thing maybe I'll add, just from an injury perspective, and I think maybe this has changed a little bit over time for me, but it's always been there, is that we can't look at our lives in silos. You're a firefighter, you hurt yourself on the job, well, that impacts everything you do at home, and vice versa. And so we really have to consider the impact of what we do everywhere on everywhere. And now, as I'm sure some those listening, you have a family, you have kids, you want to be there for your kids. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to have to say, no, I can't do that, I can't play with you, I can't pick you up, I can't do these things that I love to do because of something else that happened. And so it really is really trying to take those things that matter most to you, whether it's on the job or off the job, and keep those close, and always have them in the background. When doing things like Luke said, how do you approach exercise or training, or when faced with a situation, it's like, this is a high risk situation, how should I navigate this? Should I ask for help? Should I try and navigate this on my own? Make the smart decision and really think about what the potential consequences are. So all that to say is hopefully everyone has given some thought to injuries and how that influences their life, or even their role, as Grady said. And what we'd like to do today is share a little bit about the scope of the injury problem within the fire service. What does that actually look like? And then how could we approach this from a preventative standpoint? So are there some things that we should be aware of, or things that we should be doing to try and either reduce the risk or prevent some of the stuff that does go on? So I'm going to share my screen here. And Harrison, if you can give me a thumbs up here in a second that everything looks good. Good, perfect. Okay, so this all falls under the umbrella of the Fit to Thrive program. In addition to trying to help more firefighters be more active, there really is a priority on also staying healthy and safe. And so the two go hand in hand. And so it's not we're being more active in, kind of with disregard for the health and safety of everybody, preventing injuries and staying, safe on the job, off the job is also a huge priority of the Fit to Thrive program. So all that to say, when we're thinking about firefighters and firefighting, and this is not going to be foreign to anybody here, but it is an incredibly high risk occupation. If we look at the risks or the elevated risk for firefighters, it's cancer, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, huge mental health burden, but then injuries are also extremely high. When we look at the injury rates amongst firefighters in comparison to both the general population and other first responders, injury rates are higher. And so this is definitely something that we all need to be cognizant of and be taking steps to try and address the problems that do exist. And one other stat that I thought was pretty interesting, worth highlighting here, is that when you look at all time loss claims in the fire service, and this covers everything, injuries account for almost 90% of that. And so, when we think about the costs, as Grady said, not just about the injury being sustained for that individual firefighter, but what does the backfill look like? When this person goes off, what are the costs associated? And those costs can be absolutely astronomical. If we're not, just kind of, careful, or we don't have a plan in place on how to mitigate some of these issues. Oops. So this is actually from work that we did a little, probably going back 5-6 years ago now, working with a department in Canada, and found that sprains and strains or musculoskeletal injuries were the dominant, percentage of injuries being sustained by firefighters, and perhaps that's not, perhaps that makes sense to everybody here. And it was knees, backs, and shoulders, which, in speaking to a lot of departments, that seems to be pretty common as well. But of all the injuries sustained over a 5-year span from this department, almost half were coming from knees, back, shoulders. And then just another couple, things worth mentioning is that the of all claims, the majority, upwards of 70-80% are coming from firefighters that are less than 49, 50 years old. And that's probably because that's where most of the population sits. But most of the injuries being sustained are from the younger demographic. On this graph here, the white parts, what I'm showing, those are time lost injuries. And so the number of injuries is the height of the column, and then the white part is how many actually resulted in time lost. And all this, Grady mentioned a little bit of this up front as well, but approximately 1 in 50 firefighters will sustain an injury that requires time off every year. And those stats are from the US. And so again, it just kind of highlights the scope of this problem. Now, from a cost perspective, the report that Grady mentioned earlier, they estimated that in the US anyways, the total cost of injuries is anywhere from $1.6 to $5.9 billion. And that equates to between $50,000 and $200,000 per department and $1,500 to $5,500 per firefighter. So this can be extremely costly. And again, those numbers don't account for, all the long-term economics that are also tied to this. This is kind of looking at the claims that are being sustained or what's being paid out acutely. But these numbers will go way, way up when we start considering the accumulation over time. And again, what I'm highlighting here, when we kind of look at injuries across the board, knees, back, shoulders are big culprits. And so they were 45 to 50% of all injuries. Well, they're 60%-ish of all costs. And so when we're looking at ways or strategies to prevent this stuff, understanding the scope of the injury problem, what are firefighters hurting? Where are they getting hurt? These are going to be big things because, not all firefighter injuries can be prevented, but a lot of them can. And so understanding what the injuries look like is going to be really important for any type of prevention effort that's being put in place. Now, this is another interesting one that, research continues coming out to support this notion. Starting back, 10 years ago, and we're still seeing, more and more work with different departments, coming out that most of the injuries being sustained don't happen on the fire ground. And perhaps that's because, there are fewer fires now than there have been in the past. And so we see, NFPA publishes their annual reports, and the number of fires, has gone down. But the total number of injuries, or perhaps because of that, the total number of injuries sustained and where people are actually getting hurt is not necessarily happening primarily on the fire ground. And so this is, again, some work that we did with the department over a 5-year span. Most of the injuries that were sustained happened at the station, where perhaps they're spending most of their time, and during training and exercise. And again, this is something that's consistently coming out from a lot of different the work from a lot of different groups. And just on the training and exercise side, it is a good thing that more firefighters are perhaps engaging in some type of physical activity and exercise. And so just by sheer numbers, we have more people participating, we're probably going to have more people getting hurt. But that is one environment that I think that we have somewhat control of. And so there are a lot of things that we can be doing in an exercise or training context to really reduce the risks. And so we don't necessarily want to see, a lot of these numbers. But I think the point worth highlighting here is that we need to look at, the duties across the board for a firefighter and not just looking at the really high demanding scenarios that happen on a call. One other point to highlight here. So when we're breaking down or trying to describe the injuries that are being sustained or have been sustained, it happens across the board. All job duties, firefighters are getting hurt. We're seeing knees, back, shoulders, MSK injuries or musculoskeletal injuries are kind of the majority. One other thing I think that is really interesting, and this has come from our work, is that regardless of job duty, when we look at knees, back, and shoulders, 70% of all low back injuries were related to specific patterns or the execution of specific patterns. And so it was lifting and squatting related activities that were being performed when 70% of the low back injuries over a 5-year span were sustained. And from a knee perspective, 81% were related to stepping and lunging type tasks. And then 99% of shoulders were pushing and pulling. And again, this is irrespective of job duty. So whether you're at a call, whether you're at the station, whether you're doing some type of training rotation or you're in the gym, it was the pattern associated that was, kind of dominantly associated with those injuries, which again can provide a lot of insight to how might we reduce, firefighters' risk or prevent these down the road. Now, one thing I think it's probably worth One thing I think it's worth highlighting just before we get too far is the difference, or just kind of describing risk factors versus mechanisms. And I think this is a really important distinction if we're trying to prevent injuries from happening or reduce a firefighter's risk, because there are going to be certain risk factors that are not modifiable. Like age is a risk factor for many things, but age is not something we can change. And so when we're looking at the injuries that are sustained by firefighters, we have to understand, well, what are risk factors? What are just things that are going to make them more susceptible to getting hurt? Of those risk factors, which are modifiable, which are non-modifiable, and then what are the actual mechanisms? And so I want you thinking about, the difference between risk factor and mechanism is risk factor is something that's a little bit more distant to the actual, injury causing event. And the mechanism is really something that's very, very close. It's almost a description of what happened, in that actual activity or in that event to cause, someone's muscle, ligament, whatever it was, bone, to break or to become damaged. Okay, so risk factors far away, mechanisms very close. And if we think about what this looks like for firefighters, so we have three different kind of, I guess, tiers here, or three different time points or pieces in proximity to the actual injury causing event. So the farthest away, these are internal risk factors. So these are, if we look at a firefighter and we say, is this individual at risk? Are there things about them that are making them or predisposing them to getting hurt? And the answer is yes, there are. So things like age, things like body composition, so whether someone's overweight or obese, that could potentially increase their risk. Their health status or health history. The number one best predictor of future injury is past injury, and that's not something we can change. Okay, so what is your injury history? What is your physical fitness? Whether it's your mobility or your endurance, your aerobic capacity. These are things that are specific to me that are not going to cause me to get hurt, but they could influence my risk of potentially getting hurt. Okay, so risk factors do not cause injury. Risk factors can predispose me to injury. So should all the events, kind of align, well, then being predisposed to this one thing could then contribute to me getting hurt, but it's not going to cause me to get hurt. And so you can kind of see other things on there. Then as we move perhaps a little bit closer to the actual event, we have these external risk factors. And just a few things listed here. So this could be the work schedule that you have, or the call volume. So if you're in a slow station versus a very busy station, that's going to then have an impact on your fatigue. Department policies that are in place. What's the minimum staffing? This is going to influence your potential risk. None of these things will cause you to get hurt, but they could potentially contribute to an injury that was sustained because of X, Y, and Z. It influenced one of the other pieces. Okay, so there's going to be a bunch of stuff that is external to you that is also going to influence your risk, and then therefore whether or not you're going to be susceptible to injury. Now, when we're looking at the actual injury and how injuries happen, there are kind of four things that we can be thinking about that really need to understand that are, I guess, getting at the mechanism. So what is actually causing a firefighter to get hurt? And first one is going to be, what is the situation? Is this where, I was, on top of a roof broke, and then, I kind of fell through. So describing that event or understanding that event is going to, that was a huge contributor to me getting hurt. If the roof didn't, fall through, I wouldn't have got hurt. So really understanding what are the vital aspects of this situation. Second one is, what are the firefighters' behaviors? So in that actual, situation they found themselves in, what were the behaviors? What was the attitude? Was there, interest in asking for help from somebody else? Or, was this individual just trying to do everything on their own when perhaps they shouldn't have? Okay, so what were the behaviors this individual adopted that led to them getting hurt? Then the last two are more on, what did they actually look like? What was the execution of the activity? And the first one is more of a gross description. So from a whole body perspective, what was actually going on? Probably things that we can see. And then the second one is what is actually going on at the tissue level. And so when we talk about injuries are really, they impact various tissues. So it's bones, it's ligaments, it's discs, it's muscles. That's the stuff that gets damaged. And so when we're thinking or when we're identifying a firefighter hurt this joint, this muscle, this whatever, it was because that tissue failed. And so if we can go back to the actual event and look at what were the loads that this tissue was experiencing and what was happening in the situation, what about the firefighter's behavior? What about their whole body movement patterns that was contributing to loading a tissue in this way? And are there things that we could be doing to reduce the load on these tissues so the injury doesn't actually happen? But those are the four things that we really need to be thinking about from a mechanism standpoint that are actually contributing to causing the injury. right? Everything up front, all the internal factors, the external factors, those are making a firefighter more susceptible. But the description of the actual event, what were the behaviors, what are the specifics of the situation, and what was I doing from a movement perspective, that's what's going to actually cause the tissue to break or the injury to happen. And now just digging in a little bit more detail so we're all kind of on the same page. So starting with the end in mind. So if we actually look at the injury being sustained. So I mentioned that it really is about tissue failure. And so again, bone, muscle, whatever, but tissues fail. That's when injuries happen. And so what I'm showing you guys here on the slide, this is actually a disc in your spine. And so the disc in your spine, so you got kind of bony vertebrae, and in the middle you got this gelatinous, gooey disc that acts as a bit of like a shock absorber. Well, when someone herniates a disc, it doesn't just, the middle, the gooey bit in that disc doesn't just squirt its way out the back. We understand based on research that's been done that when you herniate a disc, this gooey bit in the middle, it weaves its way in and out of the layers of this disc. And so because it weaves its way in and out, this will allow us to understand, what are the mechanisms that actually contribute? What are the motion patterns, the loading patterns that actually contribute to a disc being herniated? And we could do the same thing for an ACL. So a firefighter tears their ACL. Well, how does the ACL become loaded? What motion patterns, what loading patterns actually contribute to that? And so we can identify with somewhat precision that this is how you actually load these tissues. Therefore, these are the motions and the loads that need to be removed in order for this tissue not to be loaded, for this firefighter not to get hurt. And so from a tissue failure perspective, it really is loads, repetition or time, and motions. And those are the big three factors. So moving, I guess, one step removed from that, so that was kind of at the tissue level. If we go back to the gross patterns, we have our key features. So part of the F2T program, we really try and promote, there's 7 key features that we have. And so these are our movement characteristics that have been shown to elevate firefighters' risk of getting hurt. And so we have knees, backs, and shoulders. And very generally speaking, from a back perspective, we want the back to stay relatively straight. Okay, so if you're lifting in a gym environment like is shown here, or you're lifting at a call, to really trying to keep your back straight is going to help reduce the load on those tissues that typically get hurt. From a knee perspective, we want to keep your knees in line with your hips and your feet. And so if you're looking at a firefighter from the front and their knees collapse together when they're lifting up, when they're squatting down, when they're jumping, when they're climbing the stairs, when they're getting in and out of a truck, if the knees are collapsing, that's going to put more load towards your ACL. And so, if you're wearing full PPE, maybe you have a couple tools with you, that's additional load of being, having to be supported by the ACL. And if that load exceeds the strength of your ACL is going to go. Okay, so there are key movement features that we really need to be cognizant of to help us avoid some of the injuries that are being sustained, because these key movement features are going to be contributing to causing the injuries that are sustained by firefighters. And again, we go back to knees, backs, and shoulders. That was the dominant injuries that are being sustained in terms of numbers, but also the dominant costs. Now, if we again go one step removed from there, so those 2 things that I mentioned there were the actual mechanisms. We go back to external factors that are contributing to why firefighters get hurt. A couple examples here. So we have call volume. And so if we either attend too few calls or too many calls, there are reasons why both of those scenarios could then contribute to or make a firefighter more susceptible. If you have too few calls, or if you have very few calls on a regular basis, then perhaps that means limited opportunity for training, or do we need to supplement your day-to-day activities with additional training so that you have the practice under your belt, you have the experience necessary to avoid some of those bad things when you actually do get a call. Or on the other side, there's some research done that if you have more than 12 calls in a 24-hour period, then the risk of getting hurt goes way up. And that could potentially be related to the physical and cognitive load or fatigue that is being sustained. If you just never have a chance to rest, that's obviously going to contribute to how alert you are, how prepared you are, how able you are to adopt some of these better patterns when you're at a call. So call volume can contribute to who gets hurt and who doesn't get hurt. And then one other, I think, interesting piece is either the time of day or the time of year. That we might see different relationships with injuries, and this may be different for your department. So just depending on what things like in your geographical location, this could obviously differ. Being up in Canada, when you have winter months, snow on the ground, it's a lot more slipping. So you're probably going to see different injuries being sustained, or the number of injuries being sustained going up or down based on the month. Some work that was published by FEMA looking at I thought this was interesting, but the most injuries were sustained between the hours of 1 to 4 in the afternoon. But if you look at the most injuries by fire, then it was actually overnight. And same kind of thing for time of year. And so the most injuries happened in the middle of the summer. But if you looked at the most injuries by fire, it's actually in the middle of the winter. And so depending on how you look at this data, it can change a little bit of the story. But again, if we're trying to understand the scope of the problem to then address some of these risk factors so we don't get hurt, I think it all helps to tell the story. This is some work that we've done actually as well. So just the design of PPE, and this is probably not foreign to anybody on the call as well, but PPE can be restricting. And so we found that full PPE is obviously the most restricting, but you still get you're still very restricted with just the jacket or just your pants on. And so if we're thinking about the the behaviors that are adopted by a firefighter, or how they're moving in a situation when they are getting hurt, well, it could be because of just the design of the PPE. And I know there are a lot of different groups exploring ways to make it a little bit more flexible or allow you to maintain some of the mobility. But this is another reason why when we think about maintaining a certain baseline of fitness or mobility in advance, knowing that your PPE is going to restrict you to varying degrees. It's what are you actually starting with? You don't want to be starting restricted, put the PPE on and have it restrict you even more, because that could then influence how you're performing in an event that ends up leading to getting hurt. So in terms of external risk factors, just what you're putting on your body every single day is another big factor to consider. Now, going all the way back to some of the internal factors that are have shown evidence in support of contributing to the firefighters getting hurt. So burnout and PTSD symptoms. So if you're emotionally exhausted, what has been shown is that your risk for injury actually goes way up. So firefighters with PTSD symptoms, or firefighters with burnout, they were more likely to sustain an injury. And so you can think about why that might be the case. Not saying that PTSD symptoms or burnout causes injury, but it can change your attitude. It can change your behaviors. It can change your motivation. It can change, how fatigued you are, how willingness you are to ask for help or perform a particular task. And so I think it's another one of those things that we need to be aware. There's a lot more going on to this injury problem than just, how you move. It's what are the potential influences on how you move, and are there things that we can be doing to support a firefighter who is, experiencing or suffering from some type of PTSD symptom or emotional exhaustion. And then this may not be, you may have seen this before, heard this before as well, but BMI and evidence going back to, I think, mid 2000s or 2005, 2006 or so, but is showing the relationship between obesity and injuries in the fire service. And it's a real thing. And if we think about obesity, is not going to cause someone to get hurt, but obesity can definitely make it more challenging to perform certain activities or adopt certain positions. And so as a risk factor, it's showing that, if you have a BMI above 30, or if you're, obese by their definitions, then you're 3 times as likely to get hurt. And so this is another reason why, we encourage, more firefighters, more active, more often. So just the fact of being active, reducing weight, that's going to go a long way to reducing risk. Again, not necessarily preventing injury from happening, because all the stars kind of have to align. But if you are an obese individual, your risk, your susceptibility to getting hurt is going to go up. So in summary, for these pieces of things, so we have our risk factors, so both internal and external. And if we're looking at ways to reduce risk or prevent firefighters from getting hurt, we need to have ways to address or accommodate those risks. And so by address, I mean maybe remove the risk or lower the risk. By accommodating, we're working around it. So again, some of the risk factors that firefighters have are non-modifiable. So this is not something, I can't change your sex, I can't change your age, I can't change your injury history, but I can perhaps help you work around it. And so we need to think about what are some of the strategies that we can put in place to address these risks, but also to accommodate these risks. And ultimately, we address the risk factors to change the outcomes or change the inciting mechanisms. Okay, so it's not just about removing a risk factor, it's about removing a risk factor or accommodating a risk factor to change the outcome, change the movement patterns, the biomechanics, the loads on certain tissues, change the description or what actually happens in that event. That's why we try and address the risk factors. So just a few thoughts here. So these are our 7 different intervention types, and we can use these to influence risk, but you can also insert any type of behavior into this piece and say, okay, I want to change someone's nutrition habits. I want to change someone's sleep habits. I want to change someone's physical activity habits. These same intervention types will work, but we can also leverage these 7 types to influence risk by thinking creatively about how can we address some of this within the infrastructure of a department. And I'm going to share just the last part of the webinar here, share 4 examples of what this could potentially look like. So we'll take the top 4. So from a training perspective, so training is a type of intervention that we can use to impart specific skills for firefighters to help alleviate risk and then prevent injury. So what would the intervention actually look like? So this could be an exercise program that all department personnel plug into. And the goal with this intervention is to increase physical fitness. So an internal risk factor. So firefighters that don't have physical fitness or on the bottom half, they're more predisposed to getting hurt. So they're more susceptible. So if we elevate fitness, that risk would potentially go away. But if we want that increase in fitness to actually change the potential incidence of injury, it's going to have to change the movement behaviors that would be happening when they get hurt. And so why something like this would work? Well, if we can increase a firefighter's fitness, and the increase in fitness then transfers or translates to job-related tasks that are being performed on the fire ground or at the station or during training, if the movement solutions or the movement behaviors they actually adopt, if they change as a result of having more fitness, this firefighter is going to be less likely to get hurt. And we have evidence to support that. So we've shown that if we can change people's fitness, or firefighters' fitness, it actually can change the way they perform more fire related activities. But if the fitness that we give them does not translate to the activities that actually matter, then this type of intervention won't work. And so there's also evidence to say that if we get more people active and try and get them more fit, well, we might see more exercise-related injuries. And so if we see more exercise-related injuries and there's not a reduction in non-exercise-related injuries, well, this intervention won't work. It hasn't worked. Okay, so being very aware of what the directive or the purpose of something like this would be. The goal is not to just make firefighters more fit. That can reduce the risk, but that's not going to avoid the injury. What has to happen to avoid the injury is there has to be some type of transfer to non-exercise related tasks. So does the increase in fitness actually change how I perform elsewhere? And we can do that. There is evidence to support that, but that is what it's going to take to lower a firefighter's risk, be it training in this example. And so one of the things, just as a tip you guys can be thinking about, is in an exercise environment, practice. So, kind of, do various exercises and practice them to get better, but don't replicate them every time. There is no perfect way to squat. There is no specific position that I should put my feet or put my hands. Do it all. If the goal is to prepare firefighters for life outside of the exercise environment, we need variability. That's how we really facilitate learning. And so if the goal is to get firefighters to adopt different movement solutions when they're on the fire ground, when they're at home, to really mitigate their risk of getting hurt, they need to learn how to move, not learn how to exercise. Okay, so in an exercise context, practice, but don't just do the same thing time and time again. Second one here, so that was training. So from an education perspective, so a potential intervention that could be used here is we're going to implement a practical workshop that highlights different strategies to address or accommodate constraints this individual firefighter might have so they can adopt these 7 key features. Okay, so it's not necessarily enough just to say, hey, here's the 7 key features, go crazy, go adopt these, because a firefighter might say, well, I can't adopt these all the time. Like, what happens if I'm picking up, this obese person between a tub and a toilet? What do I do? Or I broke my ankle. My ankle can't actually move. I have no dorsiflexion or no mobility in my ankle. What am I supposed to do? And so the workshop can actually highlight how do we overcome or accommodate constraints, whether it's the task, in the bathroom situation, or the personal constraint this individual actually has, so they can still perform in a safe manner. And so why something like this would work? Because I now have a greater understanding of not only what movements matter, but how to actually adopt these different movement patterns in different environments. And it's going to prompt an increase in awareness so that when faced with that situation, I have more strategies to actually employ. So why something like this wouldn't work? Well, if the education being provided doesn't actually have relevant or practical applications, and I don't have an opportunity perhaps to integrate it or apply it to my life, my constraints, then perhaps it's just kind of out the window, because I don't see why this matters to me. I don't see how knowing that I got to keep my back straight is going to help me when I've got no hip mobility, I've got a bum ankle, and I got to put my PPE on. And Dave just told me that my PPE is going to restrict me even more. Right? So we need to understand how can we deal with the constraints that we have to navigate the situation so we don't end up getting hurt. So one of the tips that we would share with you guys here is don't always just highlight what's wrong and say, hey, you have this is, your fitness is lacking, your mobility is lacking, and you got to fix all these things, and you got to have a big intervention that is going to take this amount of time. Show them what can be done. So given the constraints you have right now, this is me right now. What can I do to keep myself safer? And if we can teach people to accommodate the conditions that they find themselves with, that could be a much more positive experience, and perhaps they're much more inclined to actually listen, pay attention, and apply this to their own lives. Therefore, changing the way they navigate specific situations that are higher risk. Okay, third one, in terms of environmental restructuring. So this is, again, sample intervention. You can be using triggers or prompts within a workplace environment to influence firefighters' motivation to be active. Again, kind of that's the internal piece. So we're trying to, if someone is not motivated to do anything, risk goes up. If we can change the motivation, be a little bit more, to be more active, that's going to reduce the risk. But the hope ultimately is to change how they view injury. So the question that I posed up front, how do injuries kind of, affect your own life, or how do you think about these? If someone has changed their attitude and they really have embraced the idea that, like, I now understand why getting hurt matters to me, not just on the job, but off the job. Perhaps, being more mindful, perhaps they're more likely to approach a situation in a safer manner. And so why something like this would work is if they're being reminded of the things that matter most via these prompts and via these triggers, then that could make them more mindful in high risk situations. Now, if something like, or why would something like this not work? Well, if the prompts or triggers are not acknowledged or emphasized by people of influence within a department, then it's going to have very little impact on culture, and then very little impact on the firefighters' attitude, their perspective. And so it's probably not going to have any impact downstream. And so if we're going to put something like this in place, we just need to make sure that we're supporting it at all levels. And so the firefighters can get the benefits from it. So one thing, just as a tip here, so I would suggest to reframe the role of fitness. So fitness isn't just about performing on the job. So we definitely have embraced the for duty for life. And so if you reframe the role of fitness and really highlight that it's going to allow you to continue doing the things you love for as long as you want to do them, maybe this is the prompt or the trigger that a firefighter needs to say, okay, now this has resonated with me. How can I become a little bit more aware? How can I make myself a little bit safer, so I can go home at the end of the day and dance with my kids? And so this, having kids for me has changed my perspective a ton as well. And I never realized how much bicep curls would help me, but holding my two kids and trying to dance with them has changed everything. But it really is having enough fitness to do the things you love to do. And the last example I'll share here, or last type of intervention, is enablement. And so we can create and implement policies to support things like movement and sleep hygiene. There's definitely there's links between sleep and injuries or injury risk. Obviously, the movement piece of the exercise piece and injury risk. So if we implement some type of policy, departmental on-duty policy, in hopes of reducing the cognitive or physical fatigue, that might have an influence on the motivation that a firefighter has, or the attention they place on the actual activity in a high risk situation. So why something like this would work? Well, if we do provide opportunities for exercise and sleep on duty, and there's some type of policy in place, then perhaps we can reduce the cognitive load and the burnout. There's actually evidence to show that exercise can help to create an ideal, brain state during sleep. And so there's this synergistic relationship between sleep and exercise. And so if we can help promote both, then perhaps firefighters are a little bit more alert, a little bit ready, or a little bit more ready when in a high risk situation. Why this won't work? Well, if the policies created are not supported and or adopted, and this could be at any level, then firefighters are obviously not going to get the benefits of either of those. And so really here is, think about what an on-duty policy could look like within your department, within your situation, to support both exercise and sleep. And it's not just exercise, but the physical activity piece, in hopes of promoting, overall well-being. But having policies in place can be a great way to really, show support or solidify some of these things that can help to reduce risk. So the last couple of things I'll say is, and hopefully if some of this has come out from just from the talk today, but there's a lot of things that go into why firefighters get hurt. And so when we're thinking about building a program or implementing strategies to help mitigate these risks, I think we have to consider or approach it with the same complexity that is responsible for the behaviors that firefighters have. And so firefighters perform for various reasons and because various factors. And we just have to make sure that the approaches that we're taking from a prevention standpoint really reflect that. And ultimately, I'll just go back to it is for duty, it is for life, and we have to be doing everything that we can to really meet those demands. And with that, I will pause and happy to entertain any questions.
Thanks, Dave. We just had one come in. This is from Brian and Stephanie. So how do you find motivation with PTSD, high stress, or depression from chronic injuries? We all know the physical demands of our jobs as firefighters and the importance of fitness, but sometimes that stress, PTSD, or burnout overcomes the ability to self-motivate. It seems like a mental health issue in which one might need counseling, but do you have any ideas to help them before they seek that help?
I'll maybe just defer to everybody else before I chime in, but if anybody else, Luke, Dave, Garrett, if you have any comments on that one, or anything that's been done or tried within your departments as well.
Well, the IAFF does have the Center of Excellence for firefighters that have progressed to a point where it's affecting their day-to-day or their work ethic. So that is out there. Reach out to your local EAP or your department, because mental health and PTSD support is out there for sure.
Thanks, Garrett. Luke or Dave? No, I guess what I would say too is it depends on the severity of the symptoms. And so, counseling might definitely be something that is needed, but there's also evidence to support, a lot of other types of interventions to help address burnout and PTSD symptoms. If you can, think about creating a supportive community or, just helping someone connect with others. There's evidence to support physical activity and exercise. Depending on the severity of the symptoms, high intensity, low intensity can have different impacts. Things like sleep can definitely influence mental health as well. So I don't think there is a one size fits all solution. But what I would say, to Garrett's point, depending on the severity, definitely, seeking, counseling and support along those roads. But with a lot of these concerns that firefighters have, injuries, illnesses, or otherwise, it isn't just mental health problems are not just resolved with mental health solutions. Physical problems like, say obesity, cardiovascular disease are not just exercise solutions. There's a lot of stuff that needs to go into this. And so, what we're doing, not only with Fit to Thrive, but with the Wellness and Fitness Initiative in general, is really trying to highlight how all these things interact so that a department can plug into the resources that exist within all these different pillars to support their members and with the needs that they actually have.
One more thing, Dave. So
yeah.
For those at the very beginning stages of either mental illness or some sort of problems on that nature, study after study has shown that increased physical activity along with the social benefits of working out together have huge benefits. So just being more active and working together as a group can have profound effects.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that's not for any one specific reason. Sometimes because it's, people sustain, some of these mental health conditions for, again, a variety of reasons. And so somebody might benefit from the exercise because of the physical challenge. Other people might benefit because of the social interaction. Others might benefit by being outside in blue and green spaces. But there's lots of different ways that firefighters can interact with other types of interventions like physical activity and exercise to help them navigate the situation they find themselves in. But again, I think it's important to highlight that depending on the severity of the symptoms and what stage this individual finds themselves in, then support counseling would definitely be part of the solution. Any last thoughts from our team? Luke, Dave, Garrett?
No, I think just from me, Dave, I would encourage, depending on your role in your department, I would encourage you to investigate your injury problem. Look at the data that you have. If you're able to access it, I think that would be obviously a very good first step to understanding your unique situation in your department, if that's your role, or that's what I would recommend.
I think it's a great suggestion, Luke. It always comes back to understand the scope of your problem. Like your problem might be a little bit different depending on geographical location, department makeup. It's going to be really important to understand what injuries are being sustained and what are actually preventable. Not all injuries can be prevented, but there are a lot that can. And so understanding what things look like will definitely help you. And you can even look, if you have access to the data, to say, what are the numbers, but also what are the costs? If cost is a big driving factor for either management or your municipality, putting together some type of plan to say, yes, this program that we're implementing is actually going to not only reduce the number of injuries, but reduce these associated costs. And like I said in the beginning, don't just think about cost per claim. Think about backfill. Think about all the the long-term costs that go into having someone with an open case, because the money starts to add up. And so there was one department we were working with that I think the cost, like the claims wise, on an annual basis, it was somewhere around $5 million. But when you accounted for all open claims and backfill and everything else, it was about $87 million. And so it just highlights how big this issue can be. And if you're putting together a proposal for, the cost savings, that's going to go a long way. And so obviously if you can, prevent any of those injuries from happening, and I personally think that you can via, some of these different strategies, starting with, what's the scope, then it's going to be a pretty easy sell to whoever's paying. With that said, I just want to thank you guys once again for coming today. And I hope that we can interact again on a webinar soon.